We've been very good friends for a long time and professional colleagues. And professional colleagues in a quite particular way, because both of us are interested both in the psychology of large groups and also in the practice of political engagement. Deniz has been engaged in various kinds of ways and is quite a significant public figure in Turkey, particularly through social media. And she's got very large followings. This is something she has to be a little bit careful about sometimes, because when the political situation changes in a country like Turkey, you've got to be a little bit careful about how you engage publicly. But that common experience of trying to understand psychologically, discuss academically, promulgate with students, but at the same time engage in the practical politics, I think, is one of the things that's a common challenge for both of us. And so I'm particularly interested to hear about your thoughts on this vexed question, and I think for some parts of the conference, almost a bit too much for people to take, the challenges and difficulties. And then as things have gone on, I think some interesting little shafts of light have begun to emerge. So I'm keen to just hear what you're finding yourself taking away at this point from the conference this year.
Well, actually, I think it was a very fruitful discussion during the whole conference, and I learned a lot. I had lots of things in my mind to mention here at the end of the conference, but let me start by the quote from Charles Dickens, as Chinese President Xi Jinping did in the biggest capitalist summit in Davos in 2017, from A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So it was the best of times, I can say, because we have the ability to discuss all these kind of matters, and we are trying to find solutions. 100 years ago, nobody talked about preventing a war situation or how can they finish it or stop it, these kind of things. We are now in a situation that we have experiences from the last centuries. We have the mindset of discussing everything on the table, even if a war situation is a good thing or a bad thing, even this one. We all know that we are all against wars, but when we talk about peace, we need to put forward the meaning of peace for each of us. For example, every time I ask my students if peace is a good thing or a bad thing, they always say, of course, peace is a good thing, war is a bad thing. Then I ask the second question, then why you're proud of your war against the imperialists rather than signing several agreements like Versailles Agreement or Trianon Agreement that is signed by the Germans or the Hungarians? So why are you proud with your war rather than your peace? So actually the peace agreements are the real reasons for a next war generally. So we need to understand the situations, who are benefiting from the ongoing status quo and who are not very happy with it. So we cannot call all the revisionists as the bad people. Then we need to make a combination of all the parameters to understand what brings us to war conditions and what changes in our lives that gives us the opportunities to prevent from war. Actually, war is a complex phenomenon. It's not a simple phenomenon. In one of the presentations, it was said that war is something very simple. But I think it's very complex. And it's a historical phenomenon, it is an economic phenomenon, it is a psychological phenomenon, it is a political phenomenon, it's a sociological phenomenon. So we need to understand all perspectives of a war situation. Eva yesterday told about liquid times with reference to Zygmunt Bauman. Liquid modernity, liquid times, yeah, it refers to an ambiguity. It refers to a change, continuous change, while we're talking about the liquidity of times. But how it changed? I mean, in the 19th century, Eric Hobsbawm, especially for the first half of it, he called the 19th century as the age of revolutions. There were three ideologies that had sway during the whole century, liberalism, nationalism, and socialism, that changed the whole world. So then we come to the 20th century. It was the age of global wars, not the age of revolutions. Although we have the Bolshevik Revolution, the thing that marked the whole century was the global wars. The first one, the second one, and the Cold War. Almost 200 million people have lost their lives due to wars, ethnic conflicts, political regime consolidations efforts, ideological clashes. So it is one of the most nightmare centuries in human history. Then we came to the 21st century. What is the basic definitive characteristics of the 21st century? I think it's the global crisis. The first one came with a security problem, 9/11, and it changed the mindset of a global village for the first time. The first step that dissolves the understanding of globalization, global governance theories, was the first step that cuts that mindset was the 9/11 issue, the terrorism issue. At those times, actually, we from the Islamic community, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not a practicing Muslim. I don't care about the religion's rules, actually, but I'm from a Muslim community, and I have followed what's going on during this 20 years and how Islam is socially and politically constructed by the West as an enemy, as the other of the Western civilization. Before, we were the Green Corridor, who are having an alliance with the Americans, with the Western defense systems, against the socialists, against the Soviet Union. Suddenly, we became the enemies of the West, and we were dehumanized. We were not only different than the Western people, we became the other of the people, then we became dehumanized, so that when people are dying in Palestine, in Syria, in Iraq, nobody thought that these are human beings. I mean, this is not an issue for the Western societies. The only thing that affected their understanding was the immigration, the harsh refugee masses that took their attention to these issues that's going on at the other world. Then, with the securitization trends in the whole world, the defense expenditure jumped up to $2.5 trillion from $750 billion in 2001. So that makes the whole society, the whole world, prone to another world. This is a record, world record, historical record, at $2.5 trillion defense budget, military budget. And it created an effect in the economic sphere. And in 2008 and 2009, we faced with another crisis, the huge economic crisis. Although started with a mortgage crisis, it has got lots of structural impacts on the whole structure, economic structure of the world. Because after the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, we were talking about the global village, and also we were talking about the state mechanisms that are dissolving. We said that the nation state is a myth. There is no nation state border anymore. We are going to create a global governance, and we're going to be the global citizens of the world. Nation borders are not important anymore. And at the collapse of the Berlin Wall, at those times, there were only a dozen border walls in the world. But now, at this moment, 90 different nation states are building border walls surrounding their countries. One of them is Turkey. So 90 different border walls means we are living in a patchwork world that articulated to each other, and the border walls can be seen even from the sky. It's not equator lines anymore. Now we have border walls, And that border walls alarms all of us that there is a threat at the other side of the wall. So it's another securitization step for all of us. We started to shape our lives according to a risk, a threat, a danger coming from the other side of the wall. And then what happened? First, the state came to our lives again. We were trying to get rid of it, by the way. We said, let's leave the education sector to private institutions. Liberal capitalism is the best model. We don't need the states in the economy again. But with the 9/11, we called the state mechanism back to our lives to secure us, to create us safety. Then we invited them again, the state mechanism again, to protect us from bankruptcy. The national bank mechanism started to publish new monies all around the world. That's the reason for the inflation in the world, throughout the whole world now. The only medicine that they can use against these kind of crises, the liberal economies, is to publish money. There is a huge money bulk all around the world now, and they don't know how to stop the inflation due to this money, a lot of money, I can say. I couldn't find the right word in English. So the third one, since that the military, as a military actor, the state is here for our security. As an economic actor, state is together with us, again, in the society. And also we started talking about state-mandated capitalism, state-oriented capitalism, because the Chinese and the Russians started to say that liberal capitalism is weak against crisis. They cannot react properly, because the liberal democracies have to think about human rights, democratic principles, market principles, these kind of things. But as the illiberal democracies, we are, Russians and the Chinese people, we can react to these kind of crises more properly and more easily. We don't need to take care about what human beings are doing, what our citizens are doing. They're obedient. They don't have the right to react or resist. So then the third one came. It looked like a health crisis, but it wasn't a health crisis actually, when you look at the consequences of it. It became a biopolitical tool for the state mechanisms to control our bodies. They forced us to get that vaccine. They forced us to stay at home, or you let us get out from the homes. They forced us to stay in our national borders. We cannot pass through our borders, and the state mechanism legitimized its power over our whole data. Not only our body, but our whole data. We started giving our whole data with the application systems, how many steps that we make, we were vaccinated or not, we have health problems or not, everything, where we are, to the state centers. And we became a data collecting subjects, actually, I can say. So before the pandemics, the data was collected through Facebook, through Twitter, through global centers. But with the pandemics, the nation states organized their own national computing systems, and we started giving with facial recognition, with applications, we started giving all our data to the state centers. This was the third crisis. Again, this time, the state came to our lives by giving us credits. They could provide us health care systems or not. In the capitalist market, you need to pay for the health care systems. But in China, in Russia, in Turkey, the state looked after you without any money. You lived in the hospital together with the richest man, the owner of the company, and the worker together in the hospitals. And they didn't get any money. So they said, we are, again, better than the liberal democracies. So what's coming next? What's coming next is, I think it's going to be a crisis in the cyberplace, a digital crisis I'm expecting. The reason for it is the only place that non-state actors can play nowadays is the cyberspace. So if these three crises came with the empowerment of nation-state mechanisms, then they have to attack on the cyberspaces. The next step. The cryptocurrencies, they won't let the people to build non-state financial markets and institutions in the cyber level. It has to be under the control of the central banks, otherwise they won't let. And also social media structures. Many countries are started stopping social media interactions, not only China. Even before the election periods, the countries started controlling the flow of social media interactions. So I think the next step will be in the cyberspace, that we can have a global climate problem. But what brings us, this brings us to this point. The nation states are becoming the basic actors of the international system again. We are not living in a global world with non-state actors as influential as state actors. It's not a cobweb system. Now it's becoming more and more a realist paradigm. But this time, it is not, the actors are not the nation states. It is the subject states. Because in a nation state, people are citizens that has responsibilities, tasks, and also they have rights. But in a subject society, subject state society, you only have responsibilities and duties. They may not give you any rights. And this is a real totalitarian, dictatorial model, I think. The states are trying to collect, the state mechanisms are trying to collect all controlling systems as the main authority in the world. Of course, all thesis brings us the antithesis together. I mean, of course there is another wave it's going to be produced. But nowadays, during this 25 years, we are facing with the comeback of the nation state as a powerful actor, not a nation state, a subject state as a powerful actor. And this brings the whole system to a war-prone society. Because if it is a cobweb rather than a billiard ball model, the clashes are less. The nation-state actors compete each other, but not fight or war each other. So since that it's becoming a state-to-state relationship, then this rivalry can easily turn into a war situation. That's why we are facing with these kind of things. And the other thing, I think state model is a precondition for a war-prone model. The second thing is the geopolitical shift. Actually, when I was a university student, I learned everything about NATO and Warsaw Pact, the Cold War situations. But while I was writing my PhD, suddenly the Berlin Wall was collapsed, and we started talking about Fukuyama's the end of history thesis, and we were expecting a wonderful, peaceful, warless society, actually, war-free society. It was not the case. It never had been the case, actually. And then Fukuyama said that people can get into war even if they are bored. Boredom is a reason for war, actually. And the geopolitical shift during the 21st century and the entrance of China to the international arena created a huge imbalance in the scale. So the center of the world shifted to Pacific from Atlantic. And China is like the entrance of Germany to the European politics in the 19th century, very ambitious to become a huge world power, it seems that it's going to change the whole system. So this geopolitical shift, Russia as a military power, China as economic and military, hidden military power, and United States in a transition state. This brings us the ambiguities, and this makes us another war-prone system or spirit of time, I can say. And also psychosocial problems. this is very important for me, and I'm working on a book about this psychosocial problems. What's happening to us? We're talking about war, we are talking about AI, we're talking about everything. But let me give you just one number. The world defense expenditures is $2.5 trillion. But according to Brookings report, today we are spending $5 trillion for our mental and psychological disorders, psychological problems. And they say, in that report, it says, in 2030, 6 years later, we're going to spend $16 trillion to our psychological problems and mental disorders. What's happening? Something has to be happening. $16 trillion. That means that we cannot live without antidepressants. So why are we in this position? Because we are squeezed in between the past's melancholy and regression and between the future's anxiety. We cannot live the time that we are living in. We lost our time, the notion of our time. So the societies are in regression, and also the people are totally very anxious about the future. We don't know what's coming next in tomorrow. So this brings a new psychology through individuals to societies to state mechanisms to protect their life systems, life spaces. And this brings us another war situation. And also the military-industry complex. I'm going to stop it here. The military, it has been named by Eisenhower, you know, in 1961. Although he was a general, he was very much complaining about the military-industrial complex, because if someone is spending $2.5 trillion to defense expenditures, that means that someone is getting money, $2.5 trillion, from producing weapons. So this is the military industry in the world. So someone loves to have wars around us. It's not only everybody doesn't, support peaces. There are peace industries and war industries. So Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, these kind of companies. And millions of people are working in these companies. Hundreds of thousands of families are fed by these companies. So economy is based on this peace and war balance. You cannot take one of them out. It's mathematics. And that's why I'm not hopeful about the coming future, a war-free society, but maybe these kind of small regional conflicts, wars, helps us to prevent from a huge earthquake that will turn the whole world into a wreckage. I think we need to keep calm, and also to remember Hegel's words that Minerva's owl spread its wings when the night is coming down, at the dawn of the dusk.
Deniz, thank you very much indeed for that overview. And I think what I take from it, and what I took particularly from the early part of our conference, was a huge amount of anxiety about how things have developed in recent times, and a fear of how they might be going to develop. A fear because, on the one hand, we don't know, but in a sense that's always the truth about the future, you don't know it. But it's more difficult now because there seem to be a lot of negative things going on, and much more difficult to see positive and hopeful opportunities. I think some of that is because there were hopeful and positive opportunities that haven't turned out the way people had expected. So the expectation was that globalization, for example, would mean that we would not be troubled by border wars because none of that would be important anymore. We could all work freely together. In truth, it's more difficult to travel across the world now than it was in the early 1900s. People could travel right across the world if they had a little bit of money, which of course they didn't all have. They didn't even need a passport to travel around, and they could travel in much more safety than is the case now. But we thought globalization was about opening all of this up and making all things possible. Secondly, technologically, we thought that the internet was going to make sure that we would not be restricted by authoritarian leaders telling us what to do, what to think, who to communicate with. We would be free to communicate with whoever we wanted, to pick up whatever knowledge we wanted, and so on. We find it hasn't really worked out like that at all, because those who have been able to use the internet best to date have been organised crime, those who are involved in criminal conspiracies, terrorism and authoritarianism. This was not what was expected at all. And in fact, although we thought that we would be able to get all sorts of information, we wouldn't have to even travel to a library to get books, because we all know we can simply pick up our laptop, we can download a book off Amazon, we can go directly onto websites and find all sorts of news. But as was being pointed out to us by a couple of our speakers, particularly by Kurt and indeed by Hassan, the algorithms actually make sure that we get a much narrower band of information. And in fact, sometimes frightening. My wife gets really upset by the fact that as soon as she goes on to check out a particular item, maybe it's a jumper from somewhere or other, or maybe it's a place that she'd be interested to travel, suddenly on a completely different website, maybe she's done this on Amazon, and then on Facebook, hey presto, it comes up. Well, I know you're interested in jumpers. Here's a number of jumpers. Or, you're interested in traveling here. And she goes, but I never told anybody that. And it wasn't even the same company. But what it does do is it actually closes in the information, because there's so much information that you have to close it down. So there's some kind of paradoxical things happening. The thing I thought would happen, the thing I hoped would happen, it's actually the opposite thing that's actually happening. And indeed, at the times when, and I think this is going to be a very interesting one, for example, in the upcoming election, and this is the year where more people will have voted in elections than in any other year in the history of humankind. And you would think, well, that means there's an expansion of democracy. Well, not necessarily so. And indeed, we're coming up to some major elections, but not least, of course, the election for President of the United States. And people on both sides are hugely confident that their person needs to be elected, and if they are, all sorts of positive things will happen. And the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen, and you might find that your person gets elected and the opposite outcome is the one that arises. We're in a really strange kind of place where expectations are actually turned into anxieties, because we cannot be anything like so confident. So we've looked frequently in the past, and you'll know from things I've said in the past, that I really do think that on the one hand, we are heading into another global conflict. It's not going to be a rerun of the First World War or the Second World War or indeed the Cold War that you mentioned, because things are different. But it is going to be a violent conflict. The point was made by Bilal that there will always be conflict does not necessarily mean there will always be war. That it is possible, in fact it is inevitable, that we will disagree, that we will have conflict, because we won't all see things from the same perspective. The question is whether or not we then exemplify those differences by violent conflict with each other and war. And that's an important thing for us to tease out. How to disagree with each other without killing each other. How to have diversity rather than violent division. But that's not going to come easily. It just isn't. And the second thing to say is that this is, it seems to me, a really huge historical watershed. I mean, there have been multiple small watersheds, but every now and again there's something really big happens. And everything from then on is impacted by that kind of change. And it's not just a political change, you quite rightly pointed out. There's a whole series of changes. There's military changes, economic changes, political changes, health changes, all sorts of changes taking place, but often taking place around the same sort of watershed for all sorts of reasons. Now, I think as the conference went on, the enormity of all of these challenges kind of started to bear down on people. There were some very moving presentations by colleagues, picking up the reality of all of these difficulties. And I think it almost became as much as one could bear. But there's a really important thing to remember. Scott was one of the students of Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist. And she's known for very many things. But one of the things she's noted for is a comment that a few committed people can make enormous change. In fact, nothing else ever has. And for me, that's the importance of us getting together from time to time, engaging with each other in between times, exploring our different ideas and backgrounds. And I think one of the points that Harvey made, that we have become siloed in order to become huge experts on smaller and smaller amounts of stuff. Actually, it's gone too far. What we need to do is what we've been trying to do here in our conferences over the last number of years, and that is bring together people with very different skills, perspectives, backgrounds, understandings, and knowledge, and say, how can we bring these, hold these together? Not that we all become experts in these different areas, not at all, that's impossible. But that the relationship we have with each other enables us to understand just enough about what the other is saying and doing that it can help take us forward. None of us are going to be able to come back with a lecture with all the details of the stuff that Bilal presented to us. Of course not. Nor would it be appropriate. But what it does do, along with what Lydia said, is help make a connection with those in the physical sciences community who have something useful to say about how we understand things. And to me, that's part of the burden of all of this, that the relationships we have with each other can help us, first of all, to face the very frightening, dangerous world that we're living in, because it is. And if you're on your own and there's a fragmentation, and I think Lydia referred to this, and to some extent Alison referred to it as well, the sovereignty of me, you're on your own. Well, that's a very frightening place to be. But if you feel you're not entirely on your own, there are other people there, they don't have to agree with you about everybody, you have a relationship with them, then it's possible to get some kind of sense of support, but also some opportunity to learn from each other and take forward our understanding of things. And, one of the things I've thought about quite a lot over the last little while, we look to other people to develop these understandings, to try to help take things forward. But if people like those who are around in this room, and some of our colleagues who've come and gone, and some of those, if that kind of network of people is not going to be the network that takes things forward, who do we expect is going to do it? Do we expect that it's the people who are focused entirely on the entertainment business, or the military business, or are preoccupied entirely with making as much money as they can for themselves, or are too frightened to engage in anything with other people? Who is it that we expect is going to give that sort of sense of hope and opportunity? Well, I think this is the opportunity, this is the responsibility, this is the possibility for a group and network like ourselves, because we are not either on our own individually, we're in this together, but each of us beyond here has a huge network of people. You have a colossal network of people, but many of the people around this table also have their networks of people. And if we look at the kind of charts that Hassan was showing about how these people link with these people and these people, and we suddenly begin to realize that actually, as we develop thoughts, ideas, and possibilities, they can be negative ones, and we can transmit all this negativity, but they can also be positive ones. These constructive memes that we can begin to find ways of bringing out. And I suppose for me, therefore, coming near to the end of the conference, I find myself more encouraged by the challenge and opportunity of doing some of these kinds of things. And thinking, yes, we've got to make sure, Porrick, that we get these papers back from them, and possibly even quicker than we did this past year. And that the sub-editors at the New England Journal can begin to get them down, and we can get them published online, and we can get them published in hard copy, and we can get them out there, because if there are ideas that emerge from our interaction and relationship with each other, then the thing that's really important is that we just don't keep them to our own discussion, but that we get them out there. And we get the responses back, and that's why, sending out, and what I will do, unless you have an objection, we will send all of you the emails of all of those who have been here, so that you can follow up. You can contact Alan and say, well, wait a minute, let's talk about what you've learned out of the situation in South Africa. You can contact Mike and say, well, you and Hassan have been working on this business of barrier crossing leaders. Let's talk a bit more about that. You can contact Harvey and say, can I have a copy of that paper, because I want to get back to you about it. To me, that's the kind of hopeful possibility that I find coming near to the end of the conference. We've got a few more minutes. For colleagues, if they want to make their own comment, pick up, question, Porrick.
There was conversation about fragmentation and the sovereignty of me. And in the United States, there is an epidemic of loneliness.
Yes.
That increasing number of young adults choosing to live alone. Not to have relationships with another, that their relationships are all online. This is their social life, and the psychological and social implications of that have not yet been examined, since these studies have only recently come out or been written about. But the Surgeon General of the US made a very telling observation. When he was first Surgeon General, he was a workaholic, and because he was doing really good work, he said, my relationships take a second place, and because I am so involved and doing so much good. And then he retired. And he found that the phone didn't ring, the staff didn't turn up, and he had no social relations to turn to. He said, I was a lonely old man. And it wasn't until he was reappointed that he made the point that developing our relationships and nurturing our relationships with other people is the key to a successful life and successful society. And the both were in doubt at the way the trends were going.
It's a really important point you're making, Porrick, because we've focused a lot, and understandably given the current crisis, we've focused a lot on the danger to our society of conflict with the outsider, with wars with those with whom we have a difference. But actually all of history tells us that when a civilization breaks down, it breaks down from the inside, because people begin to lose faith, belief in their civilization anymore. And perhaps one of the most disturbing and shocking things that I've read in the last few weeks is not just about all the horrible death and starvation and disease and so on, but it is a report from the United States about the number of younger people who are divorcing themselves from their families. They're cutting themselves off, saying, I don't want to have any relationship with my siblings or my parents or anybody else. I'm going to live for myself and with whatever friends I choose to have, because I have the freedom to do that, I have the opportunity to do that, and that's what I'm going to do. And I look at it as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist and say, this is absolutely disastrous for them. And it's catastrophic for the society they live in. Because what you say is absolutely right. And that's why, as you know, we've gone on, and Eva has heard me saying it over and over and over again. Life is about relationships. Life is about relationships.
May I add one thing? It's another important issue for me. You may remember the French Olympics, the LGBT promotion during the whole ceremonies, and Macron tweeted that this is France. So it created a huge discussion in Turkey and all around the world. So I said on the TV program that if someone makes a call like that, all the conservatives in the world unite. You don't have chains. You only have chains that that prisons you. It will fit to this situation. This issue may bring Trump, Putin, Erdogan, the Pope, and all the Xi Jinping together. This new social, this new individual type, lonely, doesn't have a family, doesn't have a gender. No nothing. So this is socially constructed phenomenon nowadays, and it's becoming a promotion rather than a reality. So the conservatives it's not only coming from the right, but the conservatives who give values to family life, to social relationships, these kind of and traditional things, are feeling under danger. They think that their future, the future of their kids, are under danger, under risk, they think. So this may create a huge polarization in the future. France is playing the role of the French Revolution times again. They were the leaders of the liberal democracies and republicans during the Napoleonic Wars, and Macron is positioning France to another leading position again. Because they don't have military power that much, they don't have economy that much, but they have intellectual capacity, they have a brand for becoming a locomotive for a huge change, and that's why I think he's positioning himself under this issue. What you mentioned was very important, and after the pandemic, so I read some articles about a cave syndrome. Cave syndrome, the Americans, more than 10% of the Americans do not want to go out from the house. They want to stay in the house. They don't want families, they don't have any real relationships. They have huge social network in the internet, in the cyber world, and they pay with the bank or in the digital systems. Their food comes from out, everything, their only relationship with the outside world is through digital networks. So this is an issue. Even in traditional societies like us, for example, 17 million people started to live alone. The divorce rate has jumped, but the birth rate is drastically down now. We are under European countries nowadays, and it's considered as a huge threat to the economic systems, to the insurance systems, to the social systems. That's why Erdogan started to ask for the women to give birth. Marry, give birth, I'm going to support you, give economic support, give psychological support, these kind of things. And it's a risk for the future of the humanity. And we're aging. We're aging, and the people who are at my age and the older ages, we don't want any new comers in our lives so that we're to compete in the business life. I have to work until maybe 70s, 80s, maybe 100s. Because I have to take care of my kids, of my grandkids. We have a family chain, actually. So this retirement systems cannot carry a person who is going to live up until 120 years. I mean, at the age of 60, you're going to retire. So what? The government is going to take care of you 60 more years if you are going to live for 120 years. So who's going to create the resource?
Well, I'm increasingly conscious of that kind of issue, and having a generation that will come along and pay for my pension and continue things on. But as we close, one thing I would just like to flag up is something that you will read a lot about in Fareed Zakaria's most recent book about revolutions and the backlash against them. The Enlightenment generally had the perspective that we moved ever forward. Sometimes more quickly, sometimes more slowly. What Fareed Zakaria says in his book is, well, actually what you tend to have is a moving forward and then the stimulating of a backlash against it. And I think that's some of what you're talking about at the moment. Trying to navigate all of that is not easy at all. But for me, the key thing is that the only way to navigate that, either as a person yourself, or as the larger community, is to do it in relationship with each other. And I want to thank all of you, not just for all the practical contributions that you've made, but for the ongoing relationships that we have had, and I hope we'll continue to have through CRIC and the other networks we have.